Abbott podcast is what I'm calling this. That name, I understand, is not particularly creative, so it may change. But for right now, we're going to call it the Dean Abbott podcast. And I'm talking with O.W. Root, who goes by O.W. Root on Twitter, but used to go by Necktie Salvage. What is Necktie Salvage? What does that come from?
Well, that's my Twitter handle. My Twitter handle is Necktie Salvage. My name is O.W. Root. The Twitter handle, Necktie Salvage, name of my site, my handle, everything, comes from, some years back, I started finding these fantastic ties, thrift, used. And they were beautiful patterns, classic patterns, just fantastic ties, but a little wide. Generally about 3.25 inches at its widest point tends to be a very conservative middle ground. Just a very, very middle ground. A lot of these were beautiful patterns, but they're 3.75, 4 inches, pretty wide. And I can like a wide tie every now and then if you're doing it right. But I started thinking, I wonder if I can open these ties up, slim these ties down, tailor them down, and bring them back to life. I was able to do it. I figured it out. And so I started essentially bringing these ties back to life. Then I started offering it to people I knew. I said, hey, you have any ties you want me to bring down? And now I tailor ties for guys who have ties. They say, I love this tie. Maybe they got it used. Maybe it's a father's tie, grandfather's tie, something like that. They inherited it. Just want to bring it down a little bit, and we can salvage these neckties and bring them back to life, essentially.
So necktie salvage is literally what you do.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What makes a tie fantastic?
Well, first of all, the fabric. What I look for when I'm looking for a tie. Let's ignore the maker. First of all, let's just think about the tie itself. Let's not worry about who made it. What's the fabric? Is it natural? Is it nice? Is it silk? Is it wool? Is it? Sometimes you see linen ties as well, but silk is really some of the most common ties that's really common. And so a nice quality silk feels nice, has a nice hand, feels nice in your hands. It's constructed in a way that makes it easy to tie with a nice dimple. Some ties are easier to tie with dimples than other ties. Listen, if you are good and you're used to tying ties and you are confident tying your ties with a dimple, you can work with pretty much any tie. But everybody knows some ties are just easier to work with than others. And so good quality silk, easy to tie with a dimple, nice width, not too skinny, not too fat, hovering around that 3.25. Obviously no stains or rips or anything like that. And a pattern that is, there's reasons to like different patterns from different eras. But if you want to go safe, you want to talk about a nice tie, a pattern that is timeless, that can be worn today, years ago, years in the future, and still looks great. I would say that those are some pretty general things to look for.
In your mind, is there ever an occasion to wear a novelty tie?
So what would you define as a novelty tie?
Well, I suppose you could go what we might call reserved novelty and obnoxious novelty, right? So I've seen ties, for example, that look very conservative, but they're patterned with a little Mickey Mouse.
Right. Okay.
Versus the thing that Bozo wears, right? That big yellow cravat. What about the Christmas tree tie? How about the piano keyboard?
So there's a fine line between, it's fine yet it's not fine. There's a line between the motif tie and a novelty tie. So actually I have a motif tie right here. Actually I have it over here. 1 second. Here's a better example because we don't have any reps in it. So this is not a novelty. This is just a motif tie.
And it's seagulls.
It's a bird motif. I don't think they're seagulls. Maybe a quail, pheasant, something. It's not super clear. But it's a very standard motif tie. Birds are very similar.
Unknown bird tie.
What'd you say?
Unidentified bird tie.
Unidentified bird tie. Bird ties are very common motifs. So this is a motif tie, and it would not be considered a novelty tie. So it's a motif tie. We have the same motif all across the tie, equally spaced. You don't get any goofy vibes from this. This is simply just, it's a motif. You don't get any silly vibes. You're not making a joke or anything like that. Once you start making a joke, it's trying to elicit some humor. I think you start to cross into a novelty situation. And I am not a fan of novelty ties because I don't think we should be a walking joke. That being said, there are ties that are a little more playful. A little playful, but it's not a walking joke. It's not, ha ha ha, look, this is a gag. There is a brand, there is a maker, a brand that has made some sort of motif ties that are straddling that line for decades. And some of them go too hard. Some of them are just right. It's up to everybody's taste. But I would say the difference between a novelty tie and motif tie is it trying to make a joke? Is it trying to be simply silly? And so, for example, a Christmas tree motif tie, I don't see why that would be considered novelty. It's not trying to make a joke. It's an ode to the season. And it's, for example, listen, you can have a Christmas tree tie that is really ugly. You can also have a Christmas tree that is very nice. That's very similar to this. That you could say it could be this same green, and you could just have small little dark red trees that are very simple. That's not a joke. That's a motif tie. Or you could have some gargantuan thing that looks silly. The real difference is, are you trying to make a joke, or are you just having a nice sort of playful? There's a difference between joy and sort of stupidity. And to me, the novelty moves more into stupidity rather than sort of joy. And so for me, I don't think that there's much of a place for a novelty tie. Playful motif, absolutely.
What brought you to Twitter to spread this message? What motivated you to start there?
Also, sorry for my coughing. I've been getting over this cough for weeks, and it's
Yes,
just really,
it goes around.
Yeah, it's been going around. What inspired me to go to Twitter? I guess I wanted to believe in this message, and I wanted to connect with and spread it to other people who are open to that message.
You've done well there. I mean, you haven't been there that long, and you're pushing 14,000 followers, something like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. People must care.
For sure. And with Twitter, I've always tried to put out high quality content. I've never been putting out sort of clickbaity, whatever, I always try to put out content that meaningfully helps people's lives. And so I know that it does make an impact, and yeah, people absolutely connect with the message, and Twitter's a good medium for that. And I'm also on Instagram. I also write on Substack. I do a Patreon. I do all sorts of stuff like that, but I do a lot on Twitter as well.
How has your experience there been? Are people mean to you? I mean, they're mean to me, so I just wonder if they're mean to you.
That's a good question. It's interesting because I don't go out seeking to poke people, I definitely don't. I don't think that I get as much hate sometimes as some people, because I'm never going out trying to go into someone's zone and attack them. But at the same time, people do get really touchy about when you talk about clothes, and certain guys get really touchy, even when you're not talking about them. If you're talking about an abstract idea, even if you're talking about abstract, not saying you are this, you are doing bad. No, not even doing that, but just saying this is a problem in the abstract.
Right.
Whether not pointing a finger or anything, but just saying in the abstract, guys will get pretty ticked off about that. And a lot of the people who do have a problem with suggesting that you should dress decently, those guys also are some of the guys that do tend to have, I think, fairly negative attitudes online. And so when you do tick those people off, they do tend to get really ticked off. And so that's not a terribly great thing. But it doesn't really matter because I'm never attacking anybody. I'm like, I just always think if you're gonna get all mad at me, I don't know what to say. You're just getting mad at me for trying to spread this message. So,
You got to admit, once in a while, if it's the right people, it's kind of fun to make them mad.
Well, it's good to have the right enemies and it's good to have the right friends. Sometimes when you
That's
have the
right.
right
That's a
enemies,
good
it
good
reveals
way to put
something
it.
about who dislikes you, who has a problem
Right.
with this.
Yeah.
And that really
Right.
reveals
Right.
something. Absolutely.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so
Yes, I suppose the goal is to be hated by all the right people.
that's right. That's a good way to put it. Exactly. Exactly.
The what is the core of the message you're trying to get across?
That contrary to popular belief that has been sort of promulgated for quite some time, clothing does matter. And clothing is not just fabric or material or just a shirt, or it's not just surface level. It it can have a positive or negative impact on your life. It can
Mhm,
it represents something about what you believe or what you hope for or what you aim for, and that can be positive or negative, and that can tell a story. And that there's a correlation between men feeling perhaps down and acting down or lashing out in a certain way, and also feeling bad about themselves and their clothing making them uh, lesser than as well, sort of beating them down as well. And these are not really strange ideas. These are we all know this. Everybody knows that you feel better if you take a shower versus not take a shower. Everybody knows you feel better if your space is clean versus not being clean. Everybody knows this. And
mhm.
so this is not strange stuff. This is not radical earth-shattering stuff. We know this. But it is not really said so often. We're almost under the delusion that this stuff doesn't matter. And so many men, there's a correlation between men secretly being unhappy with how they look and also how they
Mhm.
feel about themselves and then how they feel about the world as well.
Where did that come from? I mean, I live in a small town in Ohio,
Mhm.
and I go to the grocery store. Everyone, pretty much everyone
Yeah.
looks like
Yeah.
like they're sleepwalking, right? I
Right.
mean, because they're literally wearing their pajamas. Um,
Right.
and
Right.
those who aren't are one step up. Um, I don't know if it's you or if it's someone else I follow on Twitter who occasionally posts like video clips from some point in the distant past, film clips, and
Yep.
points out like in the 1930s, the average man on the street, like literally the average laborer on the street, dressed then better than I don't know, like our physicians, for example, or our businessmen, do now.
Yeah.
Um, what happened?
I mean, I think this is one of these things where there are all these right answers. Because when you're describing this, there's not one right answer. There's 10 right answers, 20 right answers that
Mm,
describe what happened at a different time, or at a different layer, or it's an accelerant, or whatever. So what happened? I think a lot of things happened. I think you could talk about what it does. What does the aesthetic of man reveal? It reveals something about his civilization, about his culture, about who he is. What does it say about if you have a weak aesthetic, if you appear like you're sleepwalking, like you said, you don't care about how you look, you don't care about yourself. What does it say? Does that translate into how you feel about your civilization or your culture or where you are and the whole status of that? Of course it does. So there's this correlation between a lack of confidence in the civilization and the culture and a lack of confidence in the aesthetic as well. And that sounds really esoteric and really heady, but it's pretty directly correlated. And yeah, you could go back to maybe cultural problems of the 60s, and you could go to problems of the the internet is a great accelerant because it accelerates people sort of separating from the actual world and just going into the virtual world. And so they forget that the actual world exists. You could talk about, and these are all just things that are, like I said, just different answers. In a way, man not feeling great and instead almost allowing himself to be subservient to the machine, and maybe not only to the machine of technology, but also the machine of almost bureaucracy or almost the economic machine. Man is just, instead of the great man of history, we have the smart machine of history today. And so man is instead not strong and not confident and doesn't feel any cultural resonance there, in his life, that he's a part of a living and breathing culture. And so he doesn't have any desire to reflect that in his clothes, doesn't even know where to begin. He hasn't even thought of it. The average guy that you're talking about in this town that you live in, he doesn't think about this. He doesn't even know about this because he doesn't even know the answer.
He doesn't listen to the Dean Abbott podcast.
He doesn't listen to the Abbott podcast. He doesn't follow Necktie Salvage on Twitter.com. X.com, excuse me. And so, but
right,
he doesn't even know the question. He doesn't even know the question.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of things that have happened. And it's basically, where do you want to begin? And so whenever I talk about this, I think something about Twitter is that, or just in general, you're trying to explain something. It takes you're stretching ideas over years, essentially. And there's all these answers, and you're exploring all these different answers over a long period of time, and so like you said, this town, those are all heady things we're talking about, but how many brass tacks things are there in terms of communities, in terms of families, in terms of perhaps broken families, in terms of a lack of hope? If we think about, why would you try to, for example, the doomer, the real doomer person, the person who's really doom and gloom, why would they try to dress decently? There's no reason to, and I'm not even cutting on that, but I'm saying that there's a lot of people that just feel so down. Why would they? And so I get that, but it's a cyclical thing,
Do you think it's a result of an overall sort of diminishment in our understanding of human dignity?
For sure. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
What we think we are.
For sure. Absolutely. I mean, it absolutely is a diminishment of human dignity. I talk about dignity all the time with this because it's not about money. It's not about wealth. It's not about some signal of that. It's not saying, oh, look at this expensive item. No, it's about dignity. It's about the dignity of man, and that's what it's about.
Yeah, it's. I tend to think of all these things, and you don't hear people say this much, but I'm going to say it. I tend to think of all these things as outcroppings or outworkings of secularization, right? And that when the human being ceased to see himself as having any cosmic significance, and I'm not talking about even in any particular religious tradition, right? But when human beings began to have a sort of a default materialistic understanding of what it means to be a person, there was a shift in the way we understand ourselves, which leads to a shift in the way we dress, right? I mean, one of the markers of all religions is a kind of at least ceremonial dress. I mean, you can think of, everyone knows what a Buddhist monk looks like in the yellow and red robes, and everyone knows what a Roman Catholic priest looks like, and everyone. Well, I would think most people know what a yarmulke is, and
exactly. We know these are signals.
Clothing, right? And the clothing has always had a deep kind of religious significance.
Absolutely.
And it still does. Let me say that the slovenly guy at the Kroger over here he's engaging he's saying something about his religious beliefs.
You're absolutely right. Let me make sure that I want to make sure you can hear me with this.
I can hear you.
You're absolutely right. I think that, like you said, there's all these levels. There's obviously the level, like you said, about you know what a Buddhist monk looks like. You know what a Roman Catholic priest looks like. You know what a yarmulke looks like. And you know also, we know there is a formality even to religious rite as well. You know, there is some sort of formality. And if you keep going a little deeper too, you know, the Bible is very concerned about clothing. It's very concerned about what men wear, what women wear. Very concerned about, very detailed about the high priest wears. Very detailed.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, I mean, you want to talk about, I mean, it's very detailed.
Oh, yeah.
And then you talk about, keep going back. I mean, why do we have different clothes for men and different clothes for women? There's obviously shared pieces. Shirts are the same. But they're to reflect those eternal forms of man and woman as created by God within the culture that you are. You know, different cultures have different ways of reflecting those eternal forms. So they have these
speak in different idioms or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so clothing does have a religious, and not only is there obviously a deeply religious connection when you're really thinking about this, but like you said, a lot of this is tied to secularization. Who is man? What is man? Man is an animal instead of created differently, created by God, you know, in God's image. Instead, man's just an animal like everyone else. Right. Animals don't wear clothes. Why do we need to wear clothes? You know, and so all of a sudden you see how it starts to get cut away. You know, when you start from the old ways that man is created in God's image and he's essentially separate from animal, the clothing, all of this locks into place. Boom, 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 boom. It all makes sense. But as soon as you start getting away from that, you start to get into this secularization like you're talking about, everything starts to get a little hazier. You start to see this fall away. You start to see the inherent dignity of man fall away. And yeah, you're right, for sure.
You know, it strikes me too that, you know, in a secularized, materialistic, maybe even nihilistic context, that most people now, I think, conceive of themselves fundamentally as consumers, and they draw and they draw their identity mostly from what they consume. Now, perhaps the exception to that is the woke, who I think are people trying to draw an identity from a set of political ideas, which is, you know, and why I suppose many people talk about wokeness as a religion.
Right.
But for most people, it's about what you consume is kind of how you know who you are, right? Like, what show do you like on Netflix? What sitcom do you quote at work? And you know, and this is why we have 40-year-old men collecting action figures and that kind of thing.
Right.
But the question is, you know, why do we need to dress up to consume?
That's interesting. So you're saying, what you're saying is you're saying if we live in this consumption world, why would we dress up, essentially?
Well, that if we live in a world where every individual's appetite is the center of his reality, and his only job is to consume things, right?
Then why like, care about what you think yourself?
Right. Yeah. What signal why would he need to send a signal? Because to send a signal consciously is to be a producer.
And so this is interesting. You know what you see how some people solve this problem, if you will, is they then transfer the consumption onto the clothing. So then they make the clothing all about the materialism. They make it all about, say, the cost or the this or that. They transfer this consumerism, this consumption as life, onto the clothing. And so that's how they are able to essentially keep that consumer secularized identity while also caring about their clothing. That is also those people who do that tend to not want to go deeper with it, because going deeper with it will start to sort of cut against some of that consumerism that led them to that. I think that you're right about this producer consumer, this sort of action, being active, involved versus just passive. And I think that whether it's consuming physical items or whether it's consuming media, whether it's just letting it wash over you, I think that is the most extreme iteration of that is the person in wearing perhaps nothing or just something that is just a gray sleek suit sitting in a chair, never moving and having everything come to them, in which nothing doesn't reveal anything about who they are, doesn't reaffirm any sort of dignity. They just let the world or the virtual world come to them. And that's the most extreme iteration of that path. And I think that in our world, if you're making a conscious choice to think about your clothing in a deeper way, and often it does come with a sort of religious feeling, not necessarily a doctrinaire feeling, but just a religious feeling, it is the opposite of that. It's sort of cutting against that really hard. It's going a different path. And I think in a certain sense, if you're really properly thinking about it, you can't marry those true consumerist sort of identity with it. But some people try.
Do you hear that argument a lot from people when you suggest that people dress better? Do you hear an argument a lot about, well, that dressing better or being concerned about your dress is somehow worldly or indulgent?
Oh,
or
yeah, for sure. Yeah, that it's. I'll tell you that I don't hear this argument too much anymore, or it is not encountered so often from a religious perspective, because a lot of people, to be fair, the people I'm engaging with tend to be on a higher level, know what's going on, know the problem, and look around. And if you're already thinking in like a religious term, in a sort of religious way, or feeling that way, you're already cutting against a lot of society. And you probably, or in my experience, a lot of those people tend to also see the problems with basically people. They're realizing that there's a deeper thing here going on. I think that argument, I think that maybe that would be more prevalent before things were so bad. And I think some people probably still feel it, but it's just because they're not understanding correctly what is. They're just not understanding the thing in a certain sense. But I do think a lot of people today, even if they would have had those arguments in the past, they're not having it as much today if they're from the religious side. Now, you do hear that, not from, or I will hear stuff like that, not from the religious side, but mostly just from. It's honestly kind of a fake reason. People come up with all these fake reasons and all this cope to sort of justify something. It's just a fake reason, not from a religious perspective, but just from, oh, you shouldn't really care about that. I don't really care about money. Okay, if you want to talk about money, I'll talk to you about money, but I don't care about money. Like, I'm not like some, don't give me that, And so I'll hear stuff getting at that, but it's not from a religious perspective. It's more just from a sort of cope perspective.
It's almost like the slovenliness is a kind of uniform, right?
Yeah.
And that the average guy, well, I think generally, maybe you would agree with this, I don't know, but I would think the average guy at this point dresses more slovenly than the average woman. I think many women, maybe by nature, maybe just as a result of what's marketed to them, still maintains something more than the average dude out there, right?
For sure.
And I just don't, part of me thinks, well, this is the uniform of meaninglessness.
That's right.
Right. And here in Ohio, we just had a vote to legalize marijuana.
Yeah.
So I think, well, this is going to get worse, because they're already. I mean, this is what the uniform is, right? The uniform is about checking out of all meaningful engagement with your life,
Yeah.
and I suppose at some level that's what you're protesting.
Yes, that's right. I think that, you're talking about that vote. I drove through a town the other day. There's 3 shops within a mile. They're down and out 3 marijuana shops in Michigan. Within a mile, really. One town, down and out town, middle of nowhere. This is not some hub of great economic activity. And 3 of these shops within like a mile, honestly. Boom, boom, boom. And there were more, by the way, but I just didn't take pictures of them because they were back in the,
Oh,
So-
yeah. I saw something about that on Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like somebody wants all the men to be stoned and sloppy.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
Yes. How did you learn all this? How did you learn all that you know about clothes?
Gosh, how do you learn anything? You just pick it up. You learn it, you read, you observe. I've always been from the artistic side of things. So my background is in the arts. And so I've always been more aesthetically sort of aware in that way. And so I've always had, I don't come from I don't come from a math background. I can't do math very well and stuff like that. And so I've always been in that sort of arena. And so how did I learn it? Just how you learn anything. You learn, you pick stuff up, you teach yourself, you read, and you sort of develop your idea. And I draw in a lot of, with my idea, I'll talk about, I work with guys with style advising, and we talk about brass tack specifics, where to buy the stuff, how to wear it, everything to do.
Right.
But then there's this other philosophical layer that I talk about a lot as well. And that's obviously connected to other stuff that isn't necessarily only on clothes, but you're bringing it in from all these other directions,
Who influenced you? Would you say philosophically, and maybe who, in terms of specifically your understanding of clothing? Anyone you can name?
To be honest, I think that people have asked me this stuff before, and it's hard to say any specific thing, any specific person. I would say that what influenced me most in understanding this intersection and in the deeper way, I would say it's honestly just history. It's honestly just reading history itself and just looking into history and starting to put those pieces together, because when you start to do that, you start to realize that this time is actually quite strange. The idea that man shouldn't really care about how he looks at all is not some traditional belief. I get this argument for people. From the conservative side, sometimes they'll say, they'll give me a bunch of heat, and I'll say it's not traditional for you to be an overgrown baby that can't buy clothes for yourself. That is not some deep traditional belief. Absolutely not.
Right.
Isn't that some return to tradition? That's not tradition. No. It's a bunch of total garbage. And so really learning about history, understanding that it is our time, that is the strange time, in that the connection between difficult times and men actually dressing better is almost that's not an accident. Because because you look at all these photos, we're mentioning these photos, times are tough. And you can look at photos, paintings, whatever, and their clothes aren't perfect. Their clothes aren't even that clean, by the way. They didn't have a dishwasher or clothes, laundry machines.
Right.
But there is a cultural resonance there, and there is a sense of dignity there. And when you have a world that's beating you down in so many ways, clothes were a way of reaffirming the dignity of man. This is baked into society and living life in a non entirely decadent age. But as we live in
Mm-hmm.
this decadent age, we have allowed ourselves to be tricked out of that. And instead, we think, "Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm God. I can cure anything I want. Who cares? It doesn't matter."
Mm-hmm.
And really,
Did you say, who cares? Did you say I'm God? Is that what
yeah,
you said?
yeah. They
Right.
say,
I think that's significant. Mm-hmm.
"Yeah, I'm God. I can do whatever I want." It's just there is no I'm in God's hand, and if I wanted to be taken like that, I could be. There is none of that. It's that I've got complete control of the world because I think totally that I'm in complete control, you know? And there's this
Mm-hmm.
hubris, extreme hubris. And I would say that really piecing together different sort of philosophical approaches and religious approaches as well. Obviously, honestly, like when you really get into, you start to look at religion, like we're talking about with the Bible, this is not new. That clothes matter, and that it isn't some strange thing. It isn't materialistic to do that, to care about this, to think about this.
It strikes me too that you know, again, kind of coming down a level from the
Yeah.
question, from the ultimate questions, but um, it seems to me too that people dress now the way they do because of our total atomization from one another, and there's no sense of social belonging. Okay,
Yeah.
so you think about, just historical examples that come to mind are things like um, the Roman army, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember from Twitter, but every man thinks about the Roman Empire at least once a day, right?
Right.
And you know, I mean, the way the Roman soldier dressed was in part there to indicate his uh,
Mhm.
his identity as part
Yes.
of those legions.
Yeah.
A more recent, though still historical example is the role of, say, the plaid or the kilt
Yeah.
in the
For sure.
Highland clan culture, right? Where
Tartan has yeah.
your whole family is identified by
Yep.
your tartan.
Yeah, this
And
tartan is a perfect example. It's a geographical clan identity that and that's what I mean. Tribe has been signaling in group out group with their aesthetics. They've got a flag, and the clothing is the flag. And it does and that
Mm,
they've been this is so reality. It's just reality. This is just history. This is what I mean. When you start to learn about history, and especially people, sometimes I say maybe we should just ban making sweatshirts. People are like, "Oh my gosh, that's crazy." There were tons of laws like this throughout all of history. You can read about the Middle Ages, way back in Roman era. People say, "Guess what? You can't wear this. You can't wear this. You can't wear this color and this or this." And they just
mhm,
had rules. There are rules in the Middle Ages where at different times they're like, you can only wear so many rings, only two
mhm,
rings or this, because we don't want to be too ostentatious. We want to be this and that. We live in a total anarchy, like the atomization, and to even suggest that there should be a sense of directionality to it's the most obvious thing. That's why we live in the strange time, and that's why this stuff
mhm.
sounds so bizarre to anyone. But once you just peek a little bit into history, you see, oh, that's crazy. What are we living in right now? You know?
The other thing too that strikes me, I'm not a huge TV watcher, but sometimes at night in the evenings, I've been catching up on my classic television that I watched as a child in reruns, and
Yeah.
I noticed I've been watching some episodes of Leave It to Beaver from time to time,
Yeah.
and I noticed, maybe because I've been reading your tweets, I noticed how Ward dresses.
Hmm.
So there are scenes where Ward is coming home from work and he's always in a suit,
Hmm.
and then there are his more casual scenes where he's barbecuing on a Saturday,
Hmm.
and he's not in jeans. He's usually in some sort of high-waisted pleated pant,
For sure. 50s, 60s, absolutely. Yeah.
and like a short-sleeved
Yep.
shirt with a wide lapel.
Camp color.
You would know,
Yep.
but the point is, he doesn't look like a man today, but more importantly, he doesn't look like the Beaver.
Hmm.
And I just can't. And I think, like, there's something about the way Hugh Beaumont in those scenes is costumed, that your average viewer in 1957 would understand as a signal that Ward is the adult and the Beaver is the child.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me we've lost that distinction in our clothing as well.
Absolutely.
Well, in our culture.
For sure. All of this is connected. The man looks like a kid today. At one point in time, you had kids who looked like a kid, yet they were on the path to learning how to look like a man. So there was this sort of directionality there where they were moving towards that direction. And so they were looking up to the man to one day that's how they will dress. Today it's the exact opposite. Today, now the adults, the men, look like children. And children look insane. And so you have just this loop of childlikeness and arrested development. And think about what that is. So the man is not taking himself seriously in his clothes. He's just a goofball. He's perpetually a goofball in his clothes. And how does that make him feel about his role, about who he is? And how does his son learn about aesthetics? What is that aesthetic language he's learning? This is all tied into this sort of just infantilization, this sort of silliness, and that what you're describing about Leave It to Beaver, that's a perfect example because it's such a stark difference from today. And that is back quite a ways. And in many ways, you don't have to even go that far. You can even go into shows in the 90s and you'll see a serious difference. Even you can get into the 90s, you can see among a certain sort of middle class, definitely you're not going to be seeing dads wearing tons of graphic tees unless they are working on the car or something, unless they're like really doing something that's pretty dirty, they're not going to be wearing that out, and so this is really accelerated in post 2000 and definitely in the recent years as well.
Yeah, it strikes me again that if there is no transcendent meaning to your life, then what is the purpose of becoming an adult other than to increase your freedom to consume?
Right. Well,
right?
I think in many ways, men look around. In a certain sense, they arrive in adulthood. It's just not that much different than childhood, and it's almost underwhelming in this philosophical or psychological or spiritual way. And so they say, wow, I kind of had these images in my mind growing up or reading stories and older stories, what it was going to be like when I grew up. And it's not like that. It's not like that at all. Instead, it's just like being a kid still. And so I guess this kind of stinks. And so why even try? And the thing is, I get it. I see it. You see how that happens. You know what I mean? You see how that happens. You see how that is afflicting men. You have to be able to understand with a certain almost sort of sense of compassion to understand the problems. And that's what we see. Because man is infantilized in the culture, he's sort of just beaten down in the culture. He's sort of everything is just beating him down. You understand why it's only the select few who are able to somehow see through this and push onto something else. But unless you're in that select few, and by virtue of the fact that the select few will always be a select few, you're going to just sort of be underwhelmed and then sink.
We haven't mentioned that much, but I think our analysis has kind of come from the right in the sense of sort of moving from religious principle, religious impulse to this, but we could also come from the left in a sense and say, part of the reason that people don't make more of an effort with anything, including their personal appearance these days, is simply that economically, there's no value. There's very little value to work, right? There's no work has been emptied of meaning. I saw the other day the median home price in the United States is like $429,000, and the average yearly income is maybe $40,000.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
the economic situation simply empties people's will to almost to live.
Absolutely.
Right.
Oh,
And so that's sort of the left analysis, I think, of it.
But it's an absolutely correct analysis. I mean, I agree with that completely. I talk about Casino America often because that's what you live in. You live in a big casino. You live in one big casino, and you're not going to win. You're going to think you're going to win for a while, but the house wins in the end. And so the only thing you can do is disentangle your soul from the casino because it just eats you up. And absolutely, the economic reality is so brutal and so obscene. It's just obscene, and absolutely, there's an economic factor in this. Like you said, that you can't even afford to buy a house. You have no path forward. It's just surf all the way out, and then you've got weed being pushed on you. You got gambling being pushed on you, and why would you even try when you can't even? When you have 100 things beating you down, why would you even try? And then you could even talk about this. It gets a little bit more up in the clouds, but there's been when the entire soul has been conquered by the economic reality, there's nothing left for anything else. And that is what we've seen as well. When we see about men retreating from these fields, think about some of the fields that men have retreated from because they're feminine. Music, arts, style, anything of aesthetic taste, essentially. And instead, they're pushed to the economic. Because then and so that's where you've got to be. So this is essentially a worship of money, obviously. And when you do that, you see the entire territory to someone else. And that territory that you're leaving behind is the only thing that matters. And you're actually just turning yourself into a slave as well. Because you just ceded the entire territory of culture. That's the whole reason to live in a certain sense. And you just become a slave to the economic reality, and you let everything else fall apart. And then you have to hold on and cling on dearly to the economic reality because it's the only thing that's keeping you from dying, literally, and keeping you from straight up having a spiritual break because you've given your entire life over into just maintaining the sense of I'm better than economically. And so you've really found yourself in such a vice that is a real hellish situation. And that's kind of where we are as well. So I could definitely talk about attacking the economic reality from the left in that way. For sure. I totally agree with those points. And
say more about what you were saying about the way a person's entire soul can kind of be colonized by both our sort of entertainment and consumption oriented culture and by the economic pressures that we live in.
I mean,
you have more thoughts about that?
Yeah, for sure. What's the point of living? Because this is what we need to think about. What's the point of living? What is culture? When we talk about art, when we talk about music, when we talk about our culture, our history, the ways we are simple, not only high art, but the simple ways of living, the simple traditions you have. They don't have to be grand. They don't have to be fantastical. Just the simple traditions of life being lived. And those are part of your folk culture. Those are part of your ways. When you stop, think of life and living in love. People think of how cynical it is when there's just such an incredibly cynical, you see people mock the idea of paying for experiences. Rather, think of the deep cynicism in that critique. The deep cynicism there is so crushing. It's unbelievable. It's a total turning yourself over to the economic, to the stuff, to the consumption. And this stuff, like you said, this can be understood as a left critique, but I personally don't really think you can even think about it that way because this is religious critique. It's not some holy thing to be so possessed by money and have that be your entire raison d'être. You know, that's not some deeply holy purpose. And we're talking about our soul here. And we see how the culture has fallen away. People feel as though there's no culture. They feel as though they've lost their faith. They feel as though there's no shared culture, atomization. They feel as though They don't have a sense of dignity with themselves that they can have, whether they are rich, poor, middle class, struggling, thriving, whatever. They're not reaffirmed in that way. So the only thing they have to hold on to is this economic thing. That is their God in a certain sense. Because instead of God holding us in his hand, the dollar is holding us in his hand.
The economy, right?
And so you've turned yourself over entirely to that. So you have to hold on for dear life, because if you lose that, everything comes crushing down. And you start to talk about this, and I've talked about this for a while, and I have great followers who are very heterodox, and they understand that unless you're able to talk about this, you're not getting anywhere. But sometimes you talk about this and people think, oh, you're a socialist or something like this. I'm not. No, I'm talking about this is a legitimate. How have you, the fact that this has been cast to the side, that these considerations are just thought of as just something wholly only of the left, is a real testament to how far we've sunk, to be honest. And because we're talking about taste, and we're talking about aesthetics, and we're talking about art and culture and the stuff that makes life worth living, love and life, I think it's fair to wonder what kind of tyranny the economic reality has over us. And that doesn't, and you can't change much of it. Like I said, we live in a casino. You're not going to win, but you can try to extract your soul from it. And I'm not saying you can't make money. If you want to make money, whatever. I'm just saying we all have to make money. We all have to have jobs. I'm just saying, don't lose your soul. Don't lose the purpose, And so many things push you into that today.
We've lost the concept that a human being can be elevated or degenerated by the cultural influences that he partakes of, it participates with, etc. Because because we live only in the horizontal dimension, right? And so when your reality is conceived purely in the horizontal dimension, there's no notion of elevation. I don't know how much you are interested in classical music, but I'm interested in classical music, and not that I know very much about it, but I'm interested. And I think it's hard for me to believe that anyone could hear, I don't know, pick a great composer. Anyone could really listen to Chopin, right? And not get a sense that this is somehow more elevated than the rap song that you hear on the radio. Or better yet, hear from the guy driving around town with his windows down, right? But when you live purely in that sort of horizontal dimension, Beethoven or Chopin can't be more elevated than the rap song coming out of the guy's car, because those things are only they're all on the same horizontal dimension. And I happen to like Chopin, and that guy happens to like what he's listening to, and who are you to judge? Since there's nothing is higher than anything else.
I mean, this is a key aspect to all this. Flattening out of everything, flattening out into just sludge, just bubbling sludge. There is no gradation of greater than or lesser than. There is no higher. There is no, I don't remember who said it, but that there's this general trend in our era, in our time, to sort of erode the boundaries between man and beast, between sacred and profane, between man and woman, and between man and God, which it's essentially eroding all those distinctions. And that also comes to what you're talking about with this elevation, which is that there are higher levels. And I understand exactly what you're talking about with classical music. My degrees are in classical music. That was what I majored in. So yeah, I grew up in classical music, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Absolutely.
Well, we've been going an hour. What if you're gonna leave men listening to this who want to strike a blow against the spirit of the age? by what they put on themselves tomorrow, what's your number one piece of advice?
Understand that a few things. Whether you are intending to communicate something or not with your clothing, you are. Whether you mean to or not, you are. Whether you're aware of it or not, you are. And your clothing, it's not just vain. Not only does it send a signal to other people or represent something about what you believe, and not only can it also inspire other men and make a positive difference in the world. Question, would it be better for you to walk down the street if you're going to pollute the noise? Let's think about it this way. Would you rather create noise pollution by saying nice compliments or nice things about the world, or by swearing profusely? What is a better noise pollution? And so think about, you're walking out and you are essentially acting in the physical space. You're bringing something to the physical space. People aren't asking you to bring it, but you're bringing it anyway. Is it better to bring cursing, or is it better to bring something that is beautiful? Is it better to bring something that is chaotic, or better to bring something that is in order? And so you are making an impact on the world, whether you are aware of it or not. And you're making an impact on yourself. That can, if you haven't thought about this, you will be shocked at the difference it can make in your own way that you feel about yourself in the day. And if you want to strike a blow to this slobification, start with simply ironing your shirt. Don't wear a t-shirt, wear a shirt with a collar. You don't have to wear a tie, you don't have to wear a sport coat, nothing like that. Wear a shirt with a collar and iron it. Iron your pants, iron your shirt, and it'll take you 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever. That will change the course of your day. Because when you take care of something, when you put a little effort forth, we're afraid of sunk cost, and it makes us feel like we care about something more. When you do something you care about, when you add a little bit to it, you care about it more. And it shows about care. It sets you off in a more intentional place. And that reverberates out, not only to others, but your own actions and own behaviors. And that you might be hearing to say, oh, no way, I don't think so. I think you're full of it. Do that for 2 weeks. You'll notice a big difference. Do that for a couple of weeks, and you will notice a massive difference. You might notice the difference the first day. Do it for a couple of weeks, see what happens. And it is every single time you walk out on the street, every single time someone sees you, you can essentially say no to the slobbishness, the weakness, to the chaos. And you can inspire other men as well. They're not going to tell you. They're not going to say it. They might see you say, huh, maybe. You can make a positive difference. Things seem so far away today. You read about so much, I can't change it. You can change that. You can make a positive difference.
Tell everyone where they can find you. I know that your Twitter account, your Substack, I think you do a podcast. Talk about that and also your services. I think you do
for
style.
Sure.
No,
Yeah. You can find me I do a couple things. You can find me at twitter.com, x.com/necktie salvage. You can go to necktie-salvage.com as well. It's linked to all my stuff there. I write on Substack. I do a subscription on Substack where I break down how I approach what I wear every single day. I do it every single week. I do 4 outfits every week of varying formality. Sometimes with a tie, sport coat, sometimes very informal. So you can get an insight into how I put together an outfit. And so it's real brass tacks. Why did I use this? Why did I go with this? Why did I not do this? Why did I do this? And then on Patreon, I also do Patreon, and I do a podcast there. And I also send out 10 weekly eBay deals that are absolutely fantastic, beautiful pieces that are cheap and affordable, because you can build a wardrobe on an incredibly small budget. You don't have to have $1 million. You don't have to spend hundreds of dollars to build a wardrobe. You can do so on a quite tight budget. And I try to facilitate that with my 10 weekly deals on Patreon. And yeah, you can find me all those places. Oh, and my services, if you'd like to, I work with a lot of guys who are trying to elevate their personal aesthetic, who say, I'm sick of looking like a slob. I don't know where to start. And even if you have started, I work with a lot of guys who are pretty advanced. They're trying to tweak what they're doing in a higher way. They're really trying to level up and develop some more niche aspects of their personal style wherever you are, whether you have a good handle and you're just trying to really level it up in another way you're a little confused about, or you're starting from the ground up. You say, I don't know where to start. How do I start this? I work with guys, style advising, style consultancy, coaching. I work with you to get you to a place that reflects who you are in your lifestyle. And not every guy has the same level of formality, or has the same approach, or has the same life. But to reflect, I work with these guys and to help create an aesthetic that reflects you in a way that is organic and natural to you, and a strong aesthetic that reaffirms the dignity of man for your life. So if any of that, if you're interested in any of that, reach out, shoot me a message. I can speak English. Shoot me a message and we'll connect.
Great. That's great. That's good. I enjoyed our conversation. Thanks for doing it.
For sure. Thanks for having me on.
Let's do it again sometime.
Sound great?